Go home with me. Chu Lam angrily shouted at her. Facing Chu Lam's strikingly handsome and aggressive face, Bai Min Chao could sense the ominous aura emanating from him. His eyes seemed to be filled with hatred, as if he wanted to skin her alive. Suddenly, a stream of memories that didn't belong to her surged into her mind. It didn't take long for Bai Min Chao to absorb all the memories. Her breathing quickened, and her face turned pale with shock. This couldn't be real. How could it be? How had she transmigrated into the novel written by her cousin? Since childhood, she had been the epitome of perfection in everyone's eyes, beautiful, academically successful, always excelling far beyond her peers. Her cousin, the daughter of her second uncle, had admired her for years, but at some point, that admiration turned into envy. The cousin had used Bai Min Chao's name for a supporting character in her novel. Initially, Bai Min Chao had no idea about this. But one day, her mother heard from her second aunt that the cousin had written a novel and decided to buy it to show support. However, after reading it, her mother became furious. Not only did the novel use Bai Min Chao's name, but it also described her appearance and preferences in vivid detail, modeling the character entirely after her. It was blatant the cousin had written Bai Min Chao into her story and turned her into a detestable character. How twisted must one's mind be to do that? Her mother shared this with her, and out of curiosity, Bai Min Chao, who was on vacation and had nothing better to do, decided to read the novel. That was when she discovered the tragic fate of the supporting character Bai Min Chao. According to the plot, the original Bai Min Chao had, out of spite, married a ruffian from the countryside named Chu Lam. For the past 3 months since their wedding night, she had refused to let Chu Lam touch her. Chu Lam, who admired the original Bai Min Chao, the refined intellectual from the city, had gone out of his way to fulfill all her demands. Even though he spent restless nights alone on the cold village bed, he never so much as touched her hand. Yet despite this restraint, the storyline arranged by her cousin dictated that after a single wedding night together, Bai Min Chao became pregnant. Carelessly, Bai Min Chao didn't realize she hadn't had her period for 3 months until the day before. When she finally visited a hospital, it was confirmed she was 3 months pregnant. The current situation was that the original Bai Min Chao, upon discovering her pregnancy, had planned to climb the mountain and abort the child. Chu Lam showed up, furious, shouting at her and forbidding her to abort the baby. In their scuffle, the original Bai Min Chao accidentally fell, resulting in a miscarriage. Despite Chu Lam's patience and tolerance for her, this incident utterly crushed him, leaving him hopeless and despairing. But the cousin's storyline didn't end there. What followed was even more hair-raising. The miscarriage caused by the fall left the original Bai Min Chao infertile. Not only that, but Chu Lam divorced her. After the rural reforms, he left the countryside, built a career, and eventually became the richest man in the country. And Bai Min Chao? She couldn't win back the male lead's heart and spiraled downward like a rotting fruit, unwanted by anyone. Her tragic end came when she worked as a cleaning lady at a small restaurant, struggling to survive. One day, she looked up at the TV and saw Chu Lam, exuding confidence and charm, appearing even more refined and handsome than before. Unable to bear the blow, she collapsed and died on the spot. This was the entire tragic life of the supporting character Bai Min Chao in the novel. But now, it was her life. Bai Min Chao looked up and blankly stared at Chu Lam. To highlight the satisfaction of slapping her down and amplifying her tragic fate, her cousin had described the male supporting character in great detail, making him even more remarkable than the male lead. He had a tall, well-proportioned figure, slightly tanned skin, narrow, almond-shaped phoenix eyes that gleamed with intelligence, a straight nose, and tightly pressed lips. His physique and facial features perfectly matched Bai Min Chao's ideal type for a boyfriend. Her cousin had even specifically asked her about her dream boyfriend to make the character feel authentic. This man was modeled entirely on her preferences, so even though he was a bit wild, he was undeniably strikingly handsome. Right now, Chu Lam's gaze at her was far from kind. His eyes burned with rage, as if he were ready to explode. Bai Min Chao noticed his fiery gaze and quickly looked away. Meeting his eyes, she hesitantly said, "Why are you here?" Unexpectedly, her voice, soft and sweet, was carried over into this world. Just hearing it felt comforting. It seemed her cousin had put a lot of effort into crafting this character. Chu Lam's anger was barely contained. "Why am I here? If I hadn't come today, would you have killed our child?" He could overlook the fact that she had married him only to spite Deng Tuanqiat, the man she truly desired. In fact, he had been happy about it because otherwise, she would never have agreed to marry a simple countryman like him. He could also tolerate her refusal to let him touch her, apart from their wedding night. And he could even endure her continued obsession with Deng Tuongkiat after their marriage, believing she would eventually give up on him and live a steady life with Chu Lam. The result is that he was simply too naive. Today, this girl actually planned to get rid of their child and even intended to do it in such a cruel way. By Mingzhou. Even if you came, the child wouldn't have been saved in the end. But, of course, she couldn't say this out loud. Bai Mingzhou denied it outright. What nonsense are you talking about? Why wouldn't the child survive? Are you still trying to lie to me? You've been pregnant for 3 months now, and today you climbed the mountain to get rid of our child. Chulin stared at her beautiful face, struggling to understand how she could be so cold-hearted to even think of doing something like this to their child. The fact that I'm pregnant I only told Ma Quan. She must have been the one who told you I wanted an abortion, didn't she? Bai Mingzhou smiled faintly. The fury that Chu Lin had tried to suppress flared up again. How could this cold-hearted woman still be smiling at a time like this? You're just making things up. I'm simply not ready to be a mother yet. I was overwhelmed when I suddenly found out I was 3 months pregnant. That's why I climbed the mountain, to clear my head and get some fresh air, Bai Mingzhou explained. Her naturally sweet and soft voice was so soothing, even in an argument, that it sounded like she was gently cooing. Chu Lin's anger subsided by half, but he remained suspicious. Looking intently at her, he asked, "Are you telling the truth? Don't you know my personality by now? If I really wanted to get rid of this child, nothing you did could stop me," Bai Mingzhou replied, casting him a side glance. That glance carried a hint of reproach, but it was precisely this look that doused the flames of Chu Lin's anger. Ma Quan said you didn't want the baby. I'm still so young. I feel like I'm still a child myself, and you expect me to have one? Do you even have a conscience? Bai Mingzhou sighed, lowering her head slightly. By late October, the countryside was already chilly. The cold wind made her figure appear even more delicate. At this, Chu Lin's anger vanished completely. He hurried to her side, took off his coat, and wrapped it around her. All he could think was this little troublemaker was going to be the death of him. She must have been sent by the heavens to deal with an unruly man like him. I know this is hard for you, but now that we have a child, we can't just abandon it, right? Are you hungry? Let's go home. I'll cook for you. I just brought a chicken home. I can make some stew to nourish you, Chu Lin said, his tone softening as he tried to coax her. Feeling the warmth of his coat, Bai Mingzhou's expression softened. She looked at him and asked, "Where did you get the chicken?" "I traded for it," Chu Lin replied. Bai Mingzhou didn't dwell on his answer and instead looked down at her belly. "Chu Lin, do you really think I should have this baby?" She was still hesitant about having the child, mainly because she feared the pain. In this era, there was no such thing as pain relief during childbirth. Moreover, she wasn't sure if it was because she had absorbed the novel storyline, but everything about this felt oddly normal now. Chu Lin's face grew serious as he met her gaze. "Of course you should. This is our child. Could you really bear to abandon it?" Bai Mingzhou looked at him, and Chu Lin hesitated. This cold-hearted woman probably could. If he hadn't shown up today, who knows what decision she might have made. "Are you ready to be a father?" Bai Mingzhou asked. Without hesitation, Chu Lin replied, "Of course, I am. If I have the baby, I'll have to stay home to take care of it. Can you support both me and the child?" Chu Lin's parents had passed away from illness, and though he had an older brother and sister-in-law, they were as good as non-existent. This meant that if she had the baby, she'd have no one to help her. She would have to stay home to care for the child, leaving Chu Lin to bear the burden of providing for the family. Hearing her concerns, Chu Lin didn't seem worried at all. In fact, he looked overjoyed. "I can support both of you. I won't let you or the child go hungry. I'll work hard to make sure you both live a happy life." His heart was racing with excitement. Could it be that his wife had finally decided to settle down and build a life with him? Had she finally come around? Seeing that he understood her point, Bai Mingzhou didn't say much more. She knew Chu Lin had his own ways of making a living. He didn't need to rely solely on farming to support her and their child. "It's getting late, let's head back now," Bai Mingzhou said, standing up. But as she looked at the uneven mountain path, she hesitated. If she fell and ended up infertile, it would be a tragedy. Without hesitation, she said, "Help me down. I wasn't scared climbing up, but now I'm a little nervous about going back down." Without a word, Chu Lin stepped forward to support her, his heart brimming with joy. "Take it slow, dear. We'll go as slowly as you need." Ma Quan, having calculated the timing perfectly, had brought others to rescue Bai Mingzhou, intending to catch her mid-miscarriage and create a scandal. But when they arrived, they saw the couple walking down the mountain arm in arm, chatting and laughing. Ma Quan. The two young intellectuals she had brought with her exchanged confused glances. The older one asked, Ma Quan, didn't you say Bai Mingzhou had a miscarriage and was about to divorce Chu Lin? Ma Quan's face stiffened. She had banked on Bai Mingzhou's temper and was sure that not even Chu Lin could stop her from getting rid of the child. But now she had witnessed this scene instead. Quick to recover, Ma Quan forced a smile. It's fine as long as she's okay. Dong, thank you both for your concern. As they spoke, Chu Lin and Bai Mingzhou walked up to them. Of course, Bai Mingzhou recognized the three people before her, her good friend Ma Quan and the two young men, Dong and Chen, both fellow intellectuals. After she fell and suffered a miscarriage, although Chu Lam was extremely disappointed in her, he still carried her down the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, they encountered the three individuals. Under Ma Quan's arrangement, she was taken back to the residence of the educated youth. Along the way, everyone saw her blood-stained appearance, and news of her pregnancy and deliberate abortion spread rapidly throughout the entire Niumong brigade. The brigade had already held a poor impression of her, and this incident plunged her reputation to rock bottom, making the Niumong brigade a laughingstock among neighboring brigades. The rumors grew increasingly exaggerated, eventually morphing into a story about an educated youth girl being forced into pregnancy by a rural man and nearly losing her life after an abortion. Curious onlookers from other areas began visiting to witness the spectacle, and even government officials came to investigate the matter. All this was precisely what her good friend Ma Quan had hoped to see. Dong Jian, one of the educated youth, was an honest and reliable person, having come to the countryside in 1968. He was the team leader chosen by his peers. Tran Tong, on the other hand, was a close friend of the male lead, Dang Tuongkiet, in the original story and was equally troublesome. When they approached, Bai Minchao feigned ignorance and asked, Quian Nhi, Brother Dong, Brother Tran, why are you all here? Chu Lam was still supporting his wife. He glanced at the three educated youth, nodded briefly at Dong Jian, and ignored the other two entirely. We heard from Ma Quian and thought something might have happened to you, Dong Jian replied. Ma Quian, appearing slightly awkward, assessed Bai Minchao with a smile. Minchao, are you all right? You really scared me. I thought you went up the mountain because you were feeling hopeless. Why would I feel hopeless? Bai Minchao, still holding on to Chu Lam for support, said to Dong Jian, Brother Dong, I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing. I'm pregnant, and I was just feeling a bit overwhelmed. Quian Nhi once said she likes to go up the mountain to clear her mind when she's upset, so I thought I'd do the same. There's really nothing wrong. Her soft voice was soothing. However, Chu Lam's sharp gaze landed on Ma Quian. Feeling his piercing eyes, she couldn't help but feel her scalp tingle. Over her 2 years in the countryside, she had learned that this robed Chu Lam was one of the most fearsome and unyielding figures in the village. It's quite effective. After some mountain air, I feel much better, Bai Minchao continued, as if oblivious to the tension. Dong Jian didn't pick up on the subtleties and said, as long as you're fine, that's all that matters. Tran Tung shot Ma Quian a dissatisfied look, clearly unhappy. What's going on here? You assured me that Bai Minchao would cause a huge scene and wouldn't be able to recover from this, but this is all there is? Ma Quian, irritated, muttered, things didn't go as planned. I thought she'd get rid of that illegitimate child she's carrying. She had subtly suggested to the impressionable Bai Minchao that she should go up the mountain to reflect on whether to continue her relationship with Dang Tuongkiet. While doing so, she sighed and implied that things would be better without the baby. Previously, Bai Minchao had married the unsophisticated Chu Lam just to spite Dang Tuongkiet. If she had followed Ma Quian's suggestion for something as big as marriage, surely she'd go through with something smaller, like getting rid of the illegitimate baby. Ma Quian had planned everything, informing Chu Lam so he could intervene and ensuring witnesses were present for the aftermath. But she hadn't expected Bai Minchao to come down the mountain unscathed. You said that after marrying that country bumpkin, she'd be miserable, living each day like a year. But she seems to be doing just fine. She even needed his help to walk down the mountain. Tran Tung snapped. Ma Quian watched him, jealousy simmering beneath her exterior. When Ma Quian and Bai Minchao first arrived in the countryside, Bai Minchao's beauty made her the flower of the educated youth group. Tran Tung had once confessed his feelings to her but was mocked outright. She had dismissed him as a toad wishing to eat swan meat and told him to look in a mirror. Since then, Tran Tung's love had turned to hatred. What's wrong with Bai Min Chao's judgment? She treats someone like you as a good friend and that country bumpkin as a treasure. Tran Tung sneered, his bitterness palpable. Ma Qian was fuming but said nothing. Tran Tung, now impatient, warned, next time, bring me accurate information. He stormed off, leaving Ma Qian to stew in frustration. She realized today's efforts were wasted. Worse, she had drawn Chu Lam's attention, which was not a good sign. For now, it would be best to avoid Bai Min Chao, at least until the heat of this incident had subsided. Bai Minzhou and Chu Lin had arrived home. What they called a home was essentially a modest dwelling surrounded by bamboo fencing. It had 2 single rooms, an east room and a west room. Outside the west room was a small kitchen, extremely basic, with just a stove, a pot, and a few dishes, chopsticks, and pans. A glance was all it took to take in the entirety of this humble kitchen. The moment Chu Lin returned home, he scooped water from the water tank and drank it in big gulps. He was drenched in cold sweat from fear, terrified that his wife might harm their unborn child. He had sprinted up the mountain in panic, and although the weather was chilly, he was covered in sweat. But instead of cleaning up first, he said to Bai Minzhou, "Wife, go inside and rest. I'll head down to boil some water. After lunch, I'll catch a chicken, and before bed tonight, you'll have some chicken stew to eat." Bai Minzhou had always been a serene and unambitious person. She excelled academically, landed a well-paying job after graduation, and led a life of ease and comfort. She rarely felt the need to compete for anything, living the life of someone destined for prosperity. Though she was slightly worried about how her parents would cope with the news of her departure, she was someone who adapted to her circumstances. On the way back, she had resolved to adjust to her new life here. Once inside, Bai Minzhou examined the interior of the house. Apart from a king bed, there was a wardrobe and a storage cabinet. She knew that Chu Lin had been left penniless by his brother and sister-in-law during the family property split. What they called a division was really just an expulsion. Everything in this house, including the furniture and items within, was built or acquired by Chu Lin himself. Although the house seemed to have nothing of value, Bai Minzhou did not think so. In this era of scarcity, having such a place to call home was already fortunate. Especially notable were the new bedding in the bedroom and the cookware in the kitchen. Everything was new. These were items she had purchased after their wedding. Before marriage, Chu Lin had lived a simple life. He only cared about eating enough and considered home merely a place to sleep. He seldom spent time there. Now that she had arrived, even if her heart had not fully embraced this house, it was still home for Chu Linier. While she was lost in thought, Chu Lin walked in. The man stood tall at 1.83 meters, sporting a clean buzz cut and an open, carefree demeanor. With a roguish grin on his face, he exuded a certain rebellious charm. If he were a bit more arrogant, he would appear completely unruly, a type not commonly liked. But Bai Minzhou, having always followed the rules, found herself appreciating this kind of defiant persona. Not only was he handsome, but his physique was impeccable, perfectly aligning with her preferences. Chu Lin, unaware of how highly his wife regarded him, opened the storage cabinet. "Wife, here's a walnut cake and a cup of malted milk for you." He handed her the items, then pointed to the preserved eggs in the cabinet. "There are 3 gin of century eggs here. I just brought them back today. Help yourself if you want any." Bai Minzhou glanced at him. "I'm feeling a bit hungry. Can you prepare a cup for me?" Without hesitation, Chu Lin fetched the thermos and prepared a cup of malted milk for her, handing her the walnut cake as well. "Here, wife, eat this to tide you over. I'll cook some egg noodles once the water boils." Looking into his eyes, she raised an eyebrow. Today's menu is quite lavish: malted milk with walnut cake, egg noodles, and even a big chicken outside. Payday is still a few days away, and I remember our household doesn't have enough labor points to earn much grain. Are we spending beyond our means? It's all fine. Don't worry. Last time, I dug up 1,000-year-old ginseng on the mountain and sold it for 100 yuan. We're not short on money. Chu Lin replied with a cheeky grin. He noticed she genuinely intended to settle down and live well with him, as she was beginning to care about their livelihood. "The last time you're talking about was months ago," Bai Minzhou reminded him. The 1,000-year-old ginseng was clearly a made-up story. Chu Lin coughed awkwardly. "Wife, don't worry. I won't let you go hungry." Of course, he couldn't tell her the truth. What if she reported him? Bai Minzhou fixed her gaze on him. "I've lived with you for 3 months and know you're capable. I won't pry further, but when you sneak out at night, remember to think of me and the child." Her words struck Chu Lin deeply. His heart raced as he asked nervously but with hope, "Wife, does this mean you're willing to truly live with me? We already have a child. What do you think? Bai Minzhou sipped the aromatic malted milk and smiled gently at him. I didn't understand before, but today, I thought a lot while on the mountain. I've realized that living well with you is what matters. Everything else can wait. Alright. Everything else can wait. Chu Lin exclaimed excitedly, pulling her into a tight embrace. Finally, his persistence had paid off. Leaning into his chest, Bai Minzhou felt his warmth. Though he smelled of sweat, there was another scent, a unique fragrance that she found strangely comforting. After a while, she said, "Let me cook." No, I'll do it. As long as I'm here, you don't have to lift a finger." Despite his reluctance to let go, Chu Lin released her and hurried to the kitchen, concerned she might be hungry. At this point, one person's hunger was a shared concern. He let her sip on the malted milk and nibble on the walnut cake while he fetched eggs and noodles. Cooking noodles was quick. Just boil the water, toss in the noodles, and let it cook for a bit. Earlier, Chu Lin had filled the water tank to the brim. Unlike himself, who could drink cold water even in the winter, his wife required everything boiled. Now that she was pregnant, he couldn't afford to be careless. He poured the boiling water, plucked the chicken, and then began cooking the noodles. Before long, he brought 2 bowls of noodles into the room. On Bok Min-chow's bowl, there were 2 fried eggs, while his bowl had 1. Just 10 minutes earlier, Bok Min-chow had finished drinking her malted milk but hadn't touched the walnut cake, instead storing it away. However, she couldn't finish such a large bowl of noodles on her own and gave quite a bit to Chu Lam. "Honey, you don't need to give me more, I have enough to eat," Chu Lam said after a moment of hesitation. His portion of noodles was smaller than usual. Although he made money from his trades outside, he now had a wife and a child to think of. Naturally, he had to be more frugal. Eating 1 bite less himself meant his wife and child could have 1 bite more. "I can't eat that much," Bok Min-chow replied, giving him back a fair share of the noodles and even returning 1 fried egg to his bowl. She looked at him and said, "Go ahead, eat." Chu Lam's eyes crinkled with joy as he picked up the egg and put it back into her bowl. "The noodles are fine, but the egg is not. You eat it." Warmth surged through him. His wife cared for him so much so that she offered him noodles from her bowl and even gave him her egg. This filled his heart with peace and happiness. He resolved to visit his parents' graves and tell them the news, so they could rest easy in the afterlife. Before they passed, their biggest worry had been him. His elder brother, who disregarded their wishes, had kicked Chu Lam out of the house shortly after their burial. But Chu Lam didn't mind. In truth, he was grateful to his brother and sister-in-law. If they hadn't driven him out, how could he have built the life he had now? Bok Min-chow wasn't aware of what was running through his mind. She only knew that he cherished her, serving her such a large bowl of noodles, though she couldn't finish it. Chu Lam was only 22 years old this year, still at an age when appetites ran high. He could eat as much as was given, though he always ensured there was no waste. At this time, noodles were truly expensive. The two of them sat at the table, eating noodles together. Occasionally, their eyes met, and a warm, sweet atmosphere filled the room. That day, Bok Min-chow had a good appetite. She used to manage with just 1 egg and half the noodles. But now, she finished what remained after giving some to him. Could this be pregnancy cravings? Seeing her eat with such relish, Chu Lam was delighted. "Honey, there's still more noodles in the cabinet. If you want more, just help yourself. I've already arranged to buy 5 more pounds of flour next time. When I bring it home, we can make wontons." "Okay, you should go rest. I'll handle the chicken stew," Chu Lam said as he cleaned up the dishes. Initially, Bok Min-chow wanted to help tidy up, but seeing his determination, she decided to let him take care of it. She stored the walnut cake in the cabinet and noticed its contents. Before she arrived, the original owner and Chu Lam had kept their lives strictly separate, including meals. They each ate their own food. Thus, the original owner had no idea what Chu Lam kept in his cabinet. She hadn't expected to find so much food stored there. At this time, many households had little to eat, waiting for the grain distribution. But their cabinet held a large sack of corn weighing about 20 to 30 pounds, half a sack of finely ground cornmeal, sweet potato noodles, and several sacks of grains, each weighing around 20 pounds. There was also a smaller bag of peanuts and soybeans, weighing about 3 to 5 pounds each. Bok Min-chow knew these supplies were Chu Lam's doing. Occasionally, he would disappear late at night and return at dawn, bringing food with him. During harvest season, he worked hard like the others, but the rest of the time, he mostly idled around. His allocated grain wasn't much, yet he had long prepared for this by buying supplies elsewhere. When he was single, Chu Lam bought only enough for himself, around 100 pounds. He rarely cooked at home. But this year was different. Now that he had a wife, he bought significantly more. It had cost him quite a bit. When the grain distribution happened, he planned to make a show of purchasing more in front of everyone. That way, even if his share was small, others wouldn't question it. They might envy or resent him, but there was nothing they could do. After all, wasn't it sheer luck that Chu Lam, the notorious rogue, married so well? 2 years ago, he had caught a wild boar in the mountains, showcasing his remarkable skills. Last year, he returned from the mountains with a pheasant and a lingzi mushroom as large as a wash basin. This year, there were tales of him capturing rabbits and even finding a 1,000-year-old ginseng root. These were stories passed around by word of mouth. No one had actually seen these treasures. But people had seen Chu Lam shopping in the city, reportedly spending a large sum of money. It was that money that enabled him to buy the wardrobes, cabinets, and other furnishings after marrying a beautiful intellectual. People talked, but no one found it too surprising. Of course, some were envious. But envy alone didn't change anything. Many had ventured into the mountains searching for treasures, only to come back empty-handed or worse, bitten by venomous snakes. At the bottom of the food cabinet, along with the sacks of grain, there was a bag of brown sugar, another of white sugar, malted milk, and walnut cakes. There was even a sack of noodles. The noodles weren't like the refined ones of later generations but were handmade, coarse, and exuded the original fragrance of wheat. At this time, they were considered a rare luxury. Of course, such luxury came at a steep price. Bachman Chow realized that the money Chu Lam used to buy these goods didn't come from selling the wild boar, lingzi, or ginseng. Instead, it came from an old landlord he had befriended after being thrown out by his brother and sister-in-law.